I still remember the way the morning sunlight spilled across our kitchen table on the day of my daughter's graduation. It should have been one of the proudest moments of my life, a milestone not just for her but for our whole family. I had spent weeks preparing for it, helping her pick out her dress, planning the family dinner afterward, and even ironing the robe she would wear as she walked across that stage. My heart was so full of love and anticipation. I thought, for just one day, everything would feel right again. Even though I had sensed some distance in my husband lately, I wanted to believe he would put all of that aside for our daughter. He seemed quieter than usual that morning, but I brushed it off. Nerves, I told myself. Maybe he was just emotional, the way fathers often are when their little girls grow up. I chose to ignore the way he avoided my eyes, the way he checked his phone too often. I held on to the hope that today was about our daughter, about celebrating her hard work, her achievements, and the future waiting for her. When we arrived at the school auditorium, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Families gathered, children in caps and gowns hugged their parents, and proud mothers dabbed tears from their eyes. I squeezed my daughter's hand, telling her how proud I was. She smiled, her eyes sparkling, a mixture of nerves and pride. She deserved nothing less than perfection on that day. But life doesn't care about what we deserve. As the ceremony ended and families started gathering for photos, my husband stepped forward. He raised his voice louder than I'd ever heard him do before, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. My heart stopped as I turned toward him, confusion and dread rising in my chest. His face twisted, his voice trembling but harsh. He announced that he was leaving me. Not at home, not in private, not with dignity, but here, in front of our daughter, her classmates, and every parent and teacher around. For a moment, I couldn't even comprehend the words. It felt as if the entire world went silent, then suddenly roared with whispers, gasps, and the awkward shifting of feet. My daughter's smile collapsed, her face crumpling as if she'd been struck. And then, instead of walking away, instead of making it brief, he began screaming. Screaming about how he couldn't pretend anymore, how he was done with the lies, as if I had wronged him. As if I were the one to blame. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me whole. I wanted to shield my daughter from the spectacle, to grab her hand and run. Instead, I stood frozen, my face burning, my chest aching with a kind of humiliation I didn't know was possible. Parents looked away, some whispering, others staring with pity or judgment. Cameras that had been raised to take photos of graduates now captured the collapse of my family. He stormed away eventually, leaving behind a silence heavier than any scream. My daughter stood beside me, tears streaking her carefully applied makeup, her small frame trembling. I wrapped my arms around her, whispering that it would be okay, though my own voice cracked with the weight of the lie. Because at that moment, I wasn't sure if anything would ever be okay again. The rest of the evening blurred. I remember people coming up to me, awkwardly offering words of comfort, avoiding eye contact. I remember forcing a smile, holding my daughter close, telling her over and over that none of this was her fault. But inside, I was shattering. The betrayal, the humiliation, the cruelty of choosing this moment, it carved into me like a knife. That night, after we got home, I sat alone in the dark living room. My daughter had locked herself in her room, refusing to eat, sobbing into her pillow. I stared at the wedding photos on the wall, at the life I thought we had built together. And for the first time in 20 years, I realized I had no idea who the man I married truly was. I thought about the last few months, the late nights at work, the sudden distance, the unexplained anger. I thought about the way he had stopped looking at me, the way his phone never left his side. The signs had been there, but I chose not to see them. Because love makes us blind and hope makes us foolish. But that night, sitting in the quiet aftermath of devastation, I made myself a promise. I would not let him destroy me. He had taken my dignity in public, ripped my heart apart in front of our daughter, but he would not have the last word. If he wanted war, I would give him one. But it would not be a war of screams and humiliation. No. Mine would be a war of silence, patience, and precision. I wiped my tears and stood up. The pain in my chest hadn't lessened, but beneath it, something else had begun to stir, an ember of strength I hadn't felt in years. He thought he had broken me that day. He thought he had walked away victorious. He had no idea that all he had done was awaken a fire in me that would burn everything he thought he had built. And so, as my daughter finally fell into restless sleep, I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began the quiet work of revenge. The days after the graduation felt like walking through a storm with no umbrella. Everywhere I turned, there were whispers. Friends who once greeted me with warmth now looked at me with pity in their eyes. Parents from the school sent texts saying they were sorry, though their words only reminded me of the public spectacle. My daughter refused to talk to her father, barely spoke to me, and spent most of her time locked in her room, drowning in music loud enough to block out the world. I tried to be strong for her. I cooked her favorite meals, I slipped notes under her door. I even sat outside her room some nights just so she knew she wasn't alone. But she was hurting, and so was I. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, red with anger, spitting words like venom at me in front of everyone we knew. And every time I replayed it, I felt that familiar twist in my gut, the sharp reminder that I had been betrayed. One night, as I sat in the living room scrolling through my phone, I noticed his social media page. It was the same profile I used to glance at with pride when he'd post about family vacations or our daughter's accomplishments. But now it was littered with vague quotes about freedom and happiness. New pictures of dinners out, drinks in his hand, his smile wider than it had been in months. And always, always, a shadowy figure beside him, a woman's hand, a reflection in the glass, a perfume bottle left carelessly in the background. It hit me like ice water. The affair wasn't new. He had been building this life behind my back long before the graduation. He hadn't just left me, he had been planning it. And he had chosen that moment, that sacred day for our daughter, to stage his grand exit. I could have screamed. I could have called him, confronted him, demanded answers. But instead, I sat very still, staring at the screen until the tears dried on my cheeks. If he wanted to play dirty, I would play smarter. The first step was simple: gather proof. I remembered the words of a friend who had gone through a messy divorce years ago: "Don't ever go into battle without your weapons." So I became quiet, observant, deliberate. I checked our shared bank accounts. Money was missing, withdrawals in cash, dinners at restaurants I had never been to, hotel stays billed on nights he claimed to be working late. I started making copies, saving statements, documenting everything. At night, when the house was silent, I went through old text messages. I had never been the type to snoop, but now I searched for patterns. And then I found them half-deleted messages, cryptic enough to raise suspicion, affectionate enough to confirm everything. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was perfect." She doesn't suspect a thing. Each word cut me open, but each one also fueled me. One evening, I drove to his office after hours, parking far enough away that no one would notice me. I sat in the car and watched. I didn't know what I was expecting, maybe just to see him walk out, to confirm my suspicions. But when the door finally opened, there she was. Younger, dressed sharply, her laughter echoing through the empty parking lot. And then him, his hand on her back, his face glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years. They kissed before slipping into his car together, driving away as if I no longer existed. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest ached, but I forced myself to breathe. It wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was clarity. The truth was finally naked before me, and with truth came power. Over the following weeks, I built my case like a lawyer preparing for trial. I collected receipts, bank records, text screenshots, even photos. I contacted a lawyer, explaining everything, and he looked at me with quiet admiration. "You're more prepared than most of my clients," he said. But he didn't know that this wasn't just preparation, it was survival. Through all of this, I stayed calm around my daughter. I didn't want her to see the storm raging inside me. I told her only that we would be okay, that I was handling things, that her job was to focus on herself and her future. She nodded, still wounded, but I saw the faintest flicker of relief in her eyes. Meanwhile, my husband continued to strut around as if he had won. He posted pictures online, flaunted his new life, convinced that I was broken, humiliated, finished. But he didn't know me anymore. He didn't know the quiet strength that had begun to grow in me. He had underestimated me. And one day soon, he would regret it. The first time he tried to call me after that night, I didn't answer. The phone rang and rang, his name lighting up the screen like a wound reopening. I let it buzz until it went silent, then placed it face down on the table. He had chosen to scream at me in front of our daughter, to humiliate me when I was at my most vulnerable. He had chosen her, whoever she was, over me, over our family. Now, he didn't deserve the dignity of my voice. But I wasn't naive. I knew he wouldn't go quietly. And I was right. A week later, he showed up at the house. I heard the knock on the door, loud, impatient, the kind of knock that made my stomach twist. My daughter was upstairs, her headphones on, so I opened it myself. There he stood, looking tired, frustrated, but still wearing that smugness like cologne. "We need to talk," he said. I leaned against the door frame, keeping it halfway closed between us. "There's nothing left to talk about," I told him. His jaw tightened. "Don't play games with me. We need to figure out the divorce, the house, the money. It's not just about you." I almost laughed. Not about me? The man who shattered our family in public now wanted to play practical? I stayed calm, though, letting him ramble about logistics, about how he deserved half, maybe more, about how I should be reasonable. I nodded at the right times, said very little, and watched him squirm. Because I already knew what he didn't, that I had every piece of evidence I needed to strip him of the power he thought he had. When he finally left, muttering curses under his breath, I closed the door and locked it. My hands shook, but not from fear. From anticipation. That night, I called my lawyer again. We went over every document, every photo, every detail. He told me that with what I had, I could secure full custody of my daughter, keep the house, and even hit him financially where it hurt the most. The more I listened, the more I felt a strange calm settling over me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. About protecting myself and my daughter from a man who had no regard for either of us. Weeks passed, and the plan unfolded quietly. Court papers were filed, financial accounts frozen, motions set into motion. All the while, my husband strutted around in ignorance, convinced I was just sitting at home crying, too broken to fight back. He paraded his mistress in public now, no longer hiding her. They went to dinners, to events, even to the same restaurants we had once called our favorites. I let them. I wanted him comfortable, arrogant, unprepared. The turning point came when he tried to show up at our daughter's school. He wanted to explain things to her, or at least that's what he claimed. But when she saw him waiting by the parking lot, she walked right past him, straight to my car. Her silence toward him was louder than any scream could have been. When she slid into the passenger seat, she looked at me with tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't want to see him, Mom. Not after what he did." I reached for her hand. "You don't have to," I promised. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. My daughter was with me, heart and soul. The day of our first court hearing, I dressed carefully. Not to impress him, not even for the judge, but for myself. A navy suit, polished shoes, hair pulled back neatly. I wanted to feel strong, grounded. As I walked into the courtroom, I saw him sitting there, leaning back in his chair, whispering something to his lawyer with that same smirk he had worn at graduation. But when the judge began reviewing the evidence I had gathered, when the receipts and photos and messages were laid out one by one, that smirk started to falter. His eyes darted to me, then to the judge, then back to the papers in front of him. The color drained from his face as the realization hit. He had underestimated me. He had thought I would crumble, that I would let him dictate the terms of our ending. Instead, I had flipped the script, and now he was cornered. I sat still, my hands folded neatly on the table, while inside me a storm of satisfaction roared. It wasn't joy, no, there was nothing joyful about destroying a man I had once loved. But it was justice, cold and clear. When the hearing ended, the judge granted temporary custody to me, along with control of the house and assets until the case was fully resolved. My husband stormed out, his voice echoing down the hallway as he cursed under his breath. People turned to stare, and for once, I didn't feel the sting of humiliation. I felt powerful. That night, my daughter hugged me tighter than she had in weeks. "You didn't let him win," she whispered. And for the first time since that awful day, I allowed myself to believe she was right. The days following that first court victory were a strange mixture of relief and tension. I had gained ground, yes, but I knew it wasn't over. He wouldn't back down easily. Men like him never did. His pride wouldn't allow it. He had already started trying to turn mutual friends against me, weaving lies about how I had always been controlling, about how I was trying to poison our daughter against him. Some people believed him, or at least pretended to. Others avoided the drama entirely, their silence speaking louder than their words. I didn't waste time correcting them. My focus was on the bigger picture, protecting my daughter and finishing what he had started. But still, I won't lie, sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, when the house was still and my daughter was asleep, the weight of it pressed down on me. Memories of our earlier years together, our first home, the vacations, the laughter, would creep into my mind like ghosts, and I would ask myself how it had come to this. But those moments never lasted long. All I had to do was remember the humiliation, the betrayal, the way his voice had cut through the air at graduation while our daughter sat there frozen, her entire joy stripped away. That memory was enough to sharpen me again. He began showing up in places I didn't expect, at the grocery store, at the gas station, once even outside the cafe where I sometimes worked on paperwork. Each time, he would act like it was coincidence, but the glint in his eyes told me otherwise. He wanted to remind me he was still there, still watching, still trying to make me feel small. But I refused to give him that satisfaction. I would hold my head high, finish what I was doing, and walk away without a word. It drove him crazy. I could see it in the way his jaw clenched tighter each time. The real blow, though, was yet to come. My lawyer had discovered that he hadn't just been reckless in his personal life, he had been reckless in business too. His mistress wasn't just a fling, she had been feeding off him, using his arrogance to push him into shady deals, bad investments, reckless spending. I almost pitied him when I saw the documents, the crumbling trail of his finances. Almost. But then I remembered the look on my daughter's face that day, and any pity I felt hardened back into resolve. The court hearings dragged on, each one a battlefield. He came in angrier each time, his lawyer more desperate, his lies more transparent. But I stayed steady. The judge could see it, the difference between his chaos and my calm. My daughter's voice mattered too. When she was asked who she wanted to live with, her answer was firm, unwavering. She chose me. Watching his face as she spoke was a moment I'll never forget. His eyes widened, his composure cracked, and for once, he had no words. By the time the final ruling came, he was a shell of the man who had once thought he could destroy me. Custody was awarded fully to me. The house was mine. His financial games had left him exposed, and what little leverage he thought he had evaporated in front of everyone. He stormed out of the courtroom, slamming the doors so hard they rattled, but I didn't flinch. My daughter and I walked out slowly, hand in hand, like we had just survived a war together. In the weeks that followed, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The silence in the house no longer felt empty, it felt safe. My daughter began to smile again, to laugh more freely, to plan her future without the shadow of his temper hovering over her. And I, too, began to breathe again. There was healing to do, scars that would take time to fade, but we were moving forward. He still tried, of course. Calls, messages, attempts to twist the story to anyone who would listen. But his voice no longer carried the same power. People began to see him for what he was. And the more he flailed, the clearer it became that I had done the right thing. One evening, as my daughter and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, she turned to me and said, "Mom, you didn't just fight for you. You fought for me too. And you won." Her words settled in my heart like a balm, healing places I didn't even realize were still bleeding. And in that quiet moment, I realized something I had never expected. Revenge hadn't just been about bringing him down. It had been about rising up. About reclaiming my strength, my voice, my life. He had tried to shatter me in public, But in the end, all he had done was ignite a fire I never knew I carried. And that fire had given me the strength to walk through hell and come out the other side, stronger, freer, unbroken. He didn't disappear right away. Men like him rarely do. For months after the court's decision, he hovered like a storm that refused to die, circling at the edges of our lives, trying to claw his way back into relevance. He called my daughter endlessly, sometimes pleading, sometimes shouting, sometimes drowning himself in self-pity. She stopped answering after a while, her patience worn thin. She was old enough to see him for who he was now, not the father she had once idolized. Every ignored call was another nail in the coffin of the image he had built for himself. I heard whispers about him around town. The mistress he had sacrificed everything for had vanished, leaving him with debts, unpaid bills, and an apartment far beneath the standard he once boasted about. His once confident stride was gone. He was now seen slouched in cheap bars, nursing drinks he could barely afford, rambling to anyone who would listen about how his wife had ruined his life. The irony made me laugh quietly when I heard it, how quickly people who destroy themselves try to pin the blame on others. Meanwhile, my daughter thrived. She poured herself into college applications, her eyes sparkling with excitement as acceptance letters began to roll in. Each envelope felt like a victory, proof that she wasn't weighed down by his choices or his cruelty. She was free. Watching her bloom into her own person, confident and determined, filled me with a pride that words can't capture. I had protected her future, and no amount of his bitterness could take that away. There was one night, though, when I saw him again. I was driving home from work, and at a red light, I spotted him across the street. He was thinner, his clothes wrinkled, his face shadowed with exhaustion. He didn't see me, but I saw him, and for a brief second, I wondered if revenge had gone too far. But then I remembered graduation day. I remembered the venom in his voice as he stripped joy from our daughter's biggest moment, choosing cruelty over love. And any fleeting sympathy I felt turned cold. He had written his own ending. As months stretched into years, he faded further from our world. My daughter rarely spoke of him anymore. His absence became normal, like a shadow that finally stopped reaching across the light. I rebuilt myself, piece by piece. The house became ours in every way, filled with laughter, filled with peace. And slowly, I began to dream again, not of survival, but of possibility. Revenge, I realized, hadn't been about breaking him down. It had been about refusing to let him break us. It was about standing tall in the face of betrayal, about showing my daughter that no one, no matter how cruel, no matter how close, has the right to take away your dignity. The day she walked across the stage at her college graduation, I sat in the front row, tears brimming in my eyes, my applause echoing with every ounce of pride I carried. And when she looked out into the crowd, searching, she didn't see him. She saw me. She saw us. And that, I knew, was the ultimate victory. Time has a way of settling dust, but it never erases the scars. Even years later, there were moments when the memory of that graduation day slipped in like an uninvited guest. I could be folding laundry, cooking dinner, or walking through the quiet aisles of a grocery store when I'd suddenly hear his voice in my head, sharp and cutting, announcing to the world that he was leaving me. It had been a public execution of trust, and though I'd built a new life, the echo of it lingered. But life had a rhythm again. My daughter flourished in college, then landed her first job, brimming with the kind of energy that only youth and freedom can bring. She had inherited my resilience, though she didn't realize it yet. I would watch her laugh with her friends, making plans for the future, and I would think, this is what survival looks like. This is what winning looks like. One evening, I found myself scrolling through social media, something I rarely did. A headline caught my eye. A local business executive caught embezzling funds, facing investigation and possible jail time. My heart jolted as I read further. It was him. My ex-husband's name plastered across the screen, his reputation reduced to scandal. His company, the very thing he had prized above his family, was turning on him. Associates who once toasted to his success were now scrambling to distance themselves. The man who had screamed at me in front of hundreds of people was now a headline, his disgrace public, his downfall undeniable. I didn't gloat, not in the way people might expect. Instead, I felt an odd, quiet calm. Life had a way of balancing the scales, and I didn't need to lift a finger. He had destroyed himself long before I had the chance. My daughter called me the next day. She had seen the news too. There was a pause on the line, the kind that carries unspoken history. Then she said, "Mom, he did this to himself. I'm glad we don't have to carry his weight anymore." Her voice was steady, free of bitterness. She had let go, and in that moment, so did I. We didn't attend the trial, though we could have. We didn't stand in the back of the courtroom to watch him squirm under the weight of his lies. We didn't need to. His absence from our lives was enough. We had no more use for his pain. As the years stretched forward, our lives blossomed in ways I never imagined during those dark nights after the graduation. I built a career of my own, carved from resilience and determination. I found joy in simple things: morning coffee, evening walks, laughter shared with friends who became family. And one day, when I least expected it, I found love again, not the kind that dazzled with charm, but the kind that held steady, gentle, unshakable. My daughter walked me down the aisle when I remarried. As I looked into the eyes of a man who knew my scars and still chose me, I realized the story had come full circle. The betrayal that once defined me no longer did. The humiliation that once burned me no longer mattered. The revenge I had sought had transformed into something greater, a life rebuilt, stronger and freer than before. And somewhere out there, he faded into obscurity, his name forgotten except as a cautionary tale. He had screamed for attention, for control, for power. In the end, he had none. While I, the woman he tried to break, stood surrounded by love, proof that no betrayal, not even the cruelest one, can steal the future from those who refuse to surrender. The trial made headlines for weeks, dragging every secret of his into the light. Former colleagues came forward, each one more eager than the last to distance themselves from him, to paint him as the mastermind of deceit. I watched it unfold from a distance, never once stepping foot in the courtroom. I didn't need to. The newspapers, the television, the whispers in the town, all of them carried his downfall to me like a bitter echo. He tried to call once, just before sentencing. The number appeared on my phone, familiar and foreign all at once. My finger hovered above the screen, my breath caught in my chest. For a second, I wondered what he would say: an apology, a plea, a scream. I let it ring until it stopped, the silence after more powerful than any words he could have offered. He had lost the right to my attention long ago. My daughter, though, carried her own curiosity. She searched online, found pictures of him walking into court, disheveled, thinner than we remembered, his once confident smirk gone. She stared at the images for a long time before finally saying, "He looks small." And she was right. The man who once towered over us, who had tried to crush us with his cruelty, had shrunk into something unremarkable. When the sentence was announced, 5 years in prison, there was no celebration, no champagne. Just a deep, steady exhale. A closing of a chapter. He had destroyed himself, and the world had simply acknowledged it. Life without his shadow grew brighter each day. My daughter graduated college with honors, her laughter ringing like music as she tossed her cap into the air. This time, the joy was unbroken, pure, untouched by his bitterness. I sat in the audience, tears streaming down my face, not of grief but of triumph. This moment, this victory, belonged to us alone. Months later, I received a letter in the mail, written in his handwriting. It sat on the counter for days unopened. Finally, one evening, I slid it open. His words spilled out across the page, a mixture of excuses and half-hearted apologies, veined with self-pity. He wanted forgiveness. He wanted acknowledgement. He wanted, above all, to still matter. I folded the letter back up, placed it in a drawer, and never looked at it again. Some things don't deserve answers. Years rolled on. My daughter found love, a partner who cherished her strength and admired her fire. I watched her walk down the aisle one day, her smile radiant, her steps steady. When she looked at me, her eyes held gratitude, not for revenge, but for survival. For showing her that no betrayal could define her future. I built a quiet happiness of my own. I discovered that life after devastation wasn't just about endurance, it was about rebirth. I traveled to places I had once only dreamed of, laughed louder than I thought possible, and surrounded myself with people who lifted me rather than tore me down. And in the quiet moments, when I thought back to that day at graduation, the day my life cracked open, I no longer felt the sting. I felt pride. Because he had tried to end me in front of the world, and instead, I had risen. My revenge wasn't his ruin. My revenge was this life, blooming and unbreakable, proof that the woman he tried to destroy had built herself into something untouchable. Prison stripped him of the last pieces of pride he carried. News filtered back in fragments, stories whispered by people who had seen him during visitation, or written in the local papers when his name appeared in a minor article. He was no longer the man in tailored suits who barked orders and demanded respect. He was an inmate, wearing an ill-fitting uniform, his voice reduced to complaints and mutters, his audience other broken men who didn't care who he used to be. I never visited. Neither did my daughter. He wrote letters, more of them now, each one dripping with desperation. At first, they carried that same tone of self-pity, excuses about pressure, mistakes, how the world had turned on him unfairly. But as the months turned into years, the words changed. They became shorter, more frantic, begging for a reply. He promised he had changed, that he saw his errors, that he longed for a chance to see his daughter again. The pages carried no weight with us. We had already built lives that no longer included his presence. His absence was not a wound anymore, it was freedom. There was one letter, though, that my daughter opened. She read it silently, her eyes moving quickly, her lips pressed into a thin line. When she finished, she folded it neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and dropped it into the trash. I asked her what it said. She shrugged. "It doesn't matter, Mom. He's just trying to drag us back into his mess. I'm done with him." Her voice was calm, steady. In that moment, I saw a strength in her that mirrored my own, a cycle of resilience carried forward. Meanwhile, our world grew richer. I took up painting again, something I hadn't touched since before the marriage. Colors spilled onto canvas, chaotic and alive, a reflection of the freedom inside me. My daughter began speaking at events, sharing her story of perseverance as a way to inspire others. She didn't use names, but the message was clear: betrayal doesn't have to end you. It can teach you to fight, to grow, to rise. Every now and then, I would wonder about him, sitting behind cold walls, his world shrinking to routines of survival. Did he think of us when lights went out at night? Did he replay the moment at graduation, the way his words had cracked everything open? Did he regret it? Or was regret beyond him, swallowed by the same selfishness that had guided him all his life? It didn't matter anymore. His story had ended the day he screamed in front of hundreds. Our story had begun the moment we walked away. And every day since, we had written chapters filled with strength, love, and freedom he could never touch. When the day came that he was finally released, I barely noticed. There was no knock at my door, no attempt to find us, no confrontation. He slipped out of prison into obscurity, a man forgotten, his name carrying no weight. He became a ghost of his own making, wandering through a world that no longer cared who he had once been. We didn't celebrate his fall. We celebrated our rise. And as time moved on, we stopped even thinking of him. Because revenge isn't always fire and fury. It's silence, it's peace, it's thriving in a life someone tried to steal from you. It's standing in the light long after their shadow has vanished. He drifted through the years after prison like a man without a map. Word reached me in fragments, never sought out, only overheard in conversations or spotted in the corners of local gossip. He had no job worth mentioning, no partner to lean on, no real home. People said he moved from one cheap apartment to another, always behind on rent, always looking over his shoulder. The man who once prided himself on control had become the very thing he mocked in others: small, weak, irrelevant. One afternoon, I ran into an old acquaintance of his at the grocery store. She looked at me carefully, gauging whether to speak. Finally, she said, "I saw him last week. You wouldn't recognize him. He looks lost." Her words carried no pity, only a quiet observation, like she was describing the weather. I nodded politely and moved on. I didn't want to recognize him. I had no interest in resurrecting a ghost I'd already buried. My daughter never asked about him anymore. Her life was full, her career thriving, her circle of friends wide and warm, her heart safe with someone who loved her fully. She had built her own future, one not weighed down by his mistakes. She didn't need revenge. She had outgrown him entirely. And yet, sometimes late at night, I would think about the arc of it all. How one cruel outburst at a graduation ceremony had been the start of his unraveling. How he had screamed for power, but those words had been the last ones anyone remembered him for. Everything after had been a slow collapse, a steady fading until nothing of him remained. Years later, when news of his passing finally reached me, it felt like reading the obituary of a stranger. There were no grand tributes, no legacies left behind. Just a short notice, a handful of words marking the end of a man who had once tried to take everything from me. I folded the paper, set it aside, and made dinner for my family. His story was over, but mine continued, brighter and fuller than ever. The real revenge had never been about watching him fall. It had been about living so well that his absence no longer mattered. And that, in the end, was exactly what I had done. I sometimes sit on the porch in the evenings, a cup of tea warming my hands, and think about the road that brought me here. There were moments I thought I wouldn't survive, the humiliation, the betrayal, the loneliness. But each time, I stood up again, not just for myself but for my daughter, who deserved a mother strong enough to show her what survival looked like. What he did that day at graduation could have broken us forever. It could have defined me as a woman abandoned, left in ruins. Instead, it became the spark that forced me to build something better. I learned that revenge isn't always about shouting louder or striking back harder. Sometimes it's about patience, about letting truth unravel a person until nothing is left of the lies they built. Sometimes it's about choosing silence and dignity over chaos and noise. My daughter thrived. I thrived. We rebuilt our lives piece by piece until the cracks became invisible, replaced with new growth, stronger and more beautiful than before. I look at her now, confident, resilient, filled with joy, and I know the pain we endured became the foundation of her strength. She will never allow anyone to break her because she saw me refuse to break. As for him, his legacy faded long before he died. He became a ghost of his own making, swallowed by the very selfishness that once drove him. His downfall wasn't my doing, it was his own. And that is the truest justice of all. When I close my eyes at night, I don't see the day he humiliated me anymore. I see the years that followed, the laughter, the victories, the peace I found in refusing to surrender. He thought he was ending me. What he really did was set me free. And that freedom, that quiet, unshakable strength, is the greatest revenge I could ever have asked for.